Okie doke. Why won't this guy stop talking about forearm torque? I have issues. Uh, well, today I want to talk a little bit about strangle defense um, and a way to understand what you typically will see in high level performance. When you watch really good people compete, you'll notice that there are different levels of strangle defense. One thing that good people do is, as a hand is coming across, they'll shut down this inside space by connecting their chin to their shoulder. If the opponent does make a grip, then that's when things get interesting, because very good black belts typically will look away from the hand. The hand is the fulcrum. They'll look away from the hand and try to move away from it, move their neck towards the elbow. I did a couple of other videos showing that defense front in a match with Tai Ruotolo and Mika Galvang, and that was in the gi. And another example with Gary Tonin and Gordon Ryan without the gi. And the same pattern plays out. First, try to block this hand from coming in and making a grip, which will become the fulcrum of a lever. If that fails, then look away from the hand and move towards the elbow. Um, so the question is why? Why is that a smart thing to do? And it kind of goes to the sort of mechanics of how a lever works. So here's an example where we have a lever. For strangles, I would say that there are pretty major exceptions, but for most strangles, it will be realized as a so-called class 2 lever, in which the fulcrum and effort are on the same side of the beam and the resistance is in the center. There are other classes of levers, but for strangles, typically the resistance is going to be between the fulcrum and the effort, as shown in this diagram. So we have a couple of things that we know. We know the distance from the fulcrum to the resistance. That would be your opponent's neck. And we know the distance from the fulcrum to the effort, which you can think of as the distance between your hand and the elbow. It's a little bit more complicated in that, but we'll keep it simple for now. Now, for strangling people, you need about 11 pounds of pressure for 10 seconds, and that will put someone to sleep. In case you're wondering how I can state that with such confidence, there's this resource that I found via Google from New York City Mayor's Office. 11 pounds of pressure placed on both carotid arteries for 10 seconds. Okay, so our starting our starting point is we want to generate 11 pounds of pressure to put our opponent to sleep. The distance from the fulcrum to the resistance is, we're going to say, half a foot for this example. And the distance from the fulcrum to the effort, we'll say, is 2 feet. Those are made up numbers really meant to illustrate the concept. So don't worry about the numbers for now. I realize that they're not necessarily what you would see in real life. So to understand how this works, you kind of need to understand the idea of mechanical advantage. And mechanical advantage is a good relative measure for how much assistance you get out of a lever. Of course, the whole point of a lever is because you want mechanical advantage to make your effort, to amplify your effort so that you can do a little work and get a big outcome. So in this case, the question is, how much effort do we need to produce 11 pounds of force if we are using this lever? Okay, so I'm gonna kind of pull out this number here because this is the variable that we're interested in. Namely, this variable expresses the distance from your hand, the fulcrum, to the thing that you're trying to to exert pressure on, which is your opponent's neck. And plugging that into the static equilibrium formula, which states that here the moment of resistance equals the moment of effort, which can be expressed as Fr times dr equals Fe times dE. Static equilibrium describes the formula for how much effort would you have to expend to produce 11 pounds of force. We're saying that 11 pounds of force is the sort of equilibrium point of the system. So solving for Fe, you end up with 2.75 pounds. In other words, in this particular configuration, where your opponent's neck is half a foot from your hand, then you require 2.75 pounds of force to produce 11 pounds of strangling pressure. So that's quite a big lift, and we'll kind of point out that as we go through different examples, we'll see different levels of mechanical advantage. Generally speaking, getting 11 pounds of resistance for 2.75 pounds of effort, that's pretty awesome. And that's one way to think about the idea of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as being a martial art that is very good for smaller, weaker, lighter fighters, because if you are good at leverage, you can produce much more force than your stature might ordinarily prescribe. So far so good. Now, but this doesn't answer the question, why is it a smart thing if your opponent has connected their hand to your collar, say, or in a no-gi situation, generally made a connection to this inside space? Why is it a smart thing to look away from the hand and move towards the elbow, as most top level competitors reliably do? So let's look at this other example, and remember here, 2.75 pounds of force. So that's kind of the mark that we're trying to measure against. So here in the second example, imagine that you have a smart competitor who moves their head away from the fulcrum and towards the elbow. In this case, the distance from the fulcrum to the resistance is 1 foot. Let's say it's 1 foot. In other words, twice the distance of the previous example, which was 0.5 feet. So I'm going to draw your attention to that 1 foot. And plugging it into the static equilibrium equation, when we solve for Fe, the effort required, we get 5.5 pounds, which is different. That's twice what we had in the previous example, where with the distance of resistance equal to half a foot, we required 2.75 pounds of effort to generate 11 pounds of strangling pressure. In this example, we still need to generate 11 pounds of strangling pressure if we're going to put our opponent to sleep. But because our opponent has moved their head further down the beam of the lever, now we require more effort, 5.5 pounds of effort. And that is sort of a good example of a way to think about efficiency in jiu-jitsu. There's efficiency in the game, like the strategy that you have toward the strategy and tactics that you have around jiu-jitsu, but there's also a kind of a smaller level of efficiency, which is in a given situation optimizing the leverage to give you the most mechanical advantage. In this example, we see that the mechanical advantage of this system is 2, which is half of what we had in the previous example. Okay, so far so good. We're moving right along here. This is the third example, and the third example is the opposite, because in this case, our opponent is maybe not so smart. And rather than move towards the elbow, they move towards the hand. That would be equivalent to if someone had their choking hand on this collar, you tried to move your head closer to the choking hand, which no normal person would do, or you might do it once and until you get tired of being put to sleep. Um, so once again, we have halved the distance of resistance. This isn't a good picture, actually. This is the distance of the resistance. However, as you can see, the distance of the effort remains the same. So plugging in our dr into our static equilibrium equation, we get, when we solve for Fe, we get 1.375 pounds. In other words, in this configuration, the strangler only has to exert 1.375 pounds to generate 11 pounds of force, which is kind of awesome. So, to make a long story short, if you are being strangled, move away from the hand and towards the elbow for almost every, for the major strangles. There are exceptions, but for the major strangles like cross chokes, baseball bat chokes, etc., generally speaking, it's smart to move away from the hand. Okay, so most important of all, and this is kind of, I would say, implicit in a lot of jiu-jitsu, but it's not often drawn out as an essential aspect of most submissions. But I will contend that all submissions in jiu-jitsu consist of a lever and a wedge, at least the ones that work. And here you can see that the purpose of a wedge in strangles, so in, say, in a loop choke, you have the hand in the collar, and the second hand comes over and wedges your opponent's head into place. In the example of a cross choke, one hand is the strangling hand and provides the torque to strangle. The other hand keeps your opponent's head in place so that it doesn't move away from the hand as you strangle. So the wedge is at least as important as the lever in strangles, because without the wedge, then your opponent will just do the smart thing and move their head away from your hand. It's the wedge that prevents that from happening. And the mystery of jiu-jitsu, and one of the reasons why it's so intriguing and fascinating, is that the way that you set the wedge and the way that you apply the lever, there are apparently endless varieties. There are so many different weird and creative ways that people do this, and some of it is actually kind of mind-boggling. But in any event, really a fascinating thing to study in jiu-jitsu. So as I said, I have created a couple of other videos that do technique breakdowns that will help to elucidate this concept a little bit more, with more like live action people actually doing jiu-jitsu. So if that interests you, you could check it out on my channel. Otherwise, that's all I have, and I'll be back with more later.